This weekend we celebrate the feast day of St Mary of the Cross, MacKillop, Australia's first canonised saint. If you're maybe not so familiar with her, it's because although her feast day is a solemnity celebrated on the 8th of August, it's only once every 7 years that this comes up on a Sunday and therefore takes precedence even over the Sunday readings and prayers. And so today, in any mass you might watch online, and certainly the scripture readings are the special readings and prayers of her feast day. One of the things that Mary was well known for was her great trust in God's providence, that God would provide for her sisters, and for all people. That she had such a great trust in God's will and God's care for us that is picked up in today's scripture readings, where today we hear Jesus' beautiful teaching in the gospel, part of the Sermon on the Mount, where he teaches us not to worry about what we are to wear or what we are to eat. Because he says, look at the birds of the sky that don't sow or reap or worry, yet God provides for them. How much more will God provide for us? And that's in itself is a great lesson, I think, for us to go outside and look at the birds and look at the trees and the newly springing flowers and see that all creation is still good. God is at work in our world whether we know it or not. We also hear of God's providence in the first reading in the book of Kings, where the widow of Zarephath, having run out of food, was ready to lie down and die. She'd given up. But through the intervention of the prophet Elijah, God was able to multiply her meal, basically her flour and oil, so that the food continued and did not run out, so she was able to survive. Both beautiful examples of God's providence that Mary MacKillop believed in so strongly. And that might be easy for us to kind of dismiss and say, well, it's easy for her to say, trust in God, God will provide. But, she wasn't living in a pandemic. She wasn't living in a lockdown like we are with all the challenges and frustrations which we have. And that's absolutely true. She wasn't living in our time, but she certainly faced plenty of challenges in her own. Briefly, her story is that as a young woman, she was so taken with the plight of poor children in colonial Australia, we're talking about the mid-1800s here, that she set up an order of teaching sisters to teach poor Catholic children in Australia, and particularly in rural communities. It was a uniquely Australian vision, a uniquely Australian way of being church and of being a religious order. She came into conflict with bishops who very much wanted to have authority over her order and to, implement a more European and more centralised style of governance that caused so much conflict that in 1871 she was excommunicated from the church. That is, barred from the sacraments, barred from the Eucharist, from receiving the communion that she so deeply loved, unable to even go to Mass, unable to then stay in her own religious order, which by this time had flourished. At age 30, Mary had done extraordinary work of gathering together more than 100 sisters, teaching in more than 30 convents and schools spread around southeastern Australia. She was excommunicated. Such an awful penalty, which in today's terms, it's very hard to get excommunicated, no matter how much of a sinner you are, no matter what you do. We say you are a loved sinner and able to belong to the church. But if you come in major public conflict with a bishop or the pope, it's really the only way to get excommunicated, which Mary did. And it would have been so easy for Mary to be bitter, to be angry and furious, to rail against the bishops who are not saints, like she is, against the bishops and priests who conspired against her. But this is her holiness, that in the midst of the worst time, which she became dreadfully sick, no doubt through anxiety and stress, even in that she would never say a word against the priests and bishops and would not allow her sisters to do so either. She actually instead believed that these adversities and challenges were what God intended for her and the order to face, in order they might grow and be purified on the way to be made stronger. I want to say this, that saints are made in times such as this. Mary MacKillop's holiness is not in that she was able to have a vision and set up schools, although it was a wonderful thing that is her legacy even today, and I went to a school run by Josephite nuns, but rather the way in which she handled such adversity, with graciousness, compassion, trust. She would write even lovingly to the bishop saying, poor bishop, such and such. She had such incredible mercy for all those around her. This is what makes her a saint, her holiness that was purified in the furnace of the worst possible challenges of her time. And I want to hold her up as an example for us, because I believe that in the midst of our pandemic, in the midst of our lockdown and the many very real challenges we face, some of us are scared of sickness and death, Some of us are worried about our livelihoods. Others of us are worried about our social isolation and the welfare of those we love. These are very real challenges I don't want to minimize in any way. But saints are made in times like these. It is how you and I rise to the challenges before us that really define something of our character. Do we buckle? Do we give in? Do we turn to just trying to dull our senses with overwatching television, overeating, overdrinking, whatever it might be, that it's just a way of checking out and giving up? Or do we instead dig deep, become more prayerful, dig deep into the lives of the saints and Jesus in the scriptures? Do we find ways to connect in new ways, which many of us are doing online? The very fact you're watching this says you have the capacity to do that. Do we think about who else might be lonely and isolated and make an effort to phone them? Does now become the time where I become a better neighbour? Perhaps, even though I can't go and visit anybody in their house, maybe dropping a note or a card to people's letterboxes, maybe to people in my block, my street, my unit block, whatever it might be. Do I find creative ways to dig deep and become stronger in the midst of this pandemic? Because saints are made in times like these. Perhaps our holiness can grow in the midst of this present time. At the moment, in the middle of August, it seems like lockdown is going to be extended for a bit longer yet. Until we're all vaccinated, we know that things may not return to the kind of normal life we once enjoyed. But perhaps we can make fruitful use of this time to be quieter, more still, and yet somehow more proactive and reach out. Can we, in fact, even though we wear masks even outdoors now, learn to smile with our eyes, to make eye contact with people as we pass them at a safe distance on the street, and smile and say, hello, have a good day, to be especially grateful and say thank you to those who may serve us in shops or wherever else that may be? Let's take the chance to learn from St. Mary of the Cross MacKillop, whose holiness grew in the toughest of times, that we might too. God bless you.